What would happen if the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation went undercover as a cashier and uncovered that one of his own employees was being extorted in broad daylight? Have you ever looked at your own reflection and felt like you were staring at a complete stranger? Evan Carter, founder and CEO of the Iron Fuel gas station chain, had that moment on a freezing Tuesday morning. In the mirror of the restroom at Branch 27, the reflection staring back wasn't the man in a sharp suit and polished leather shoes he was used to, but a new hire wearing a wrinkled blue shirt, a crooked name tag that read Jake Morrison, and a faded baseball cap pulled low over half his face. The non-prescription glasses softened the assertive gaze of a seasoned executive into the unsure expression of someone desperate for work. Evan muttered with dry irony as he adjusted his collar. "Looks like I'm playing the role of a failure," before stepping out of that narrow room, ready for a performance he never imagined would change the very system he had built. Branch 27 had once been Iron Fuel's crown jewel: high sales, glowing customer reviews, and consistent employee retention. But over the past year, Evan began to notice irregularities in the reports, a sudden spike in resignations, erratic revenue patterns, and vague but persistent complaints from staff about a suffocating work culture. None of it was concrete enough to accuse anyone, but his instincts told him it was time to see things for himself, not as the boss, but as a stranger from within, invisible, but watching. The store was packed that morning. A steady stream of customers rushed in for their morning coffee and sandwiches, filling the small convenience area with the hum of flickering fluorescent lights and the beeping of barcode scanners. As Evan stepped up to the counter, a bulky man with slicked back hair barked, "You're the transfer from Zone 6, right? Derek Owens, assistant manager here." His handshake was firm and dominant, like he was making sure Evan knew who held the power. Evan nodded, playing the part of the timid new guy. "Thanks for the opportunity, sir." "Drop the sir," Derek replied, squinting with a half smile. "We don't care about titles here, just speed and results." He immediately pointed toward a young woman working the register, Lena, with tired eyes and brown hair tied back in a messy ponytail. "Lena will show you the ropes. She's fast, as long as she doesn't screw up." As Derek walked away, Evan caught the subtle way Lena's shoulders relaxed, just a fraction, as if a weight had lifted for a moment. That was the first signal. There was something wrong here, not just the stress of a busy shift, but a heavier kind of pressure, something more controlling and dehumanizing. Evan realized he had just stepped into a much larger play, and this time, he wasn't a spectator. He was about to rewrite the script. Lena Walsh didn't say much as she trained Evan, or rather, Jake, on how to operate the register system, input data, and process receipts. But her eyes spoke volumes of a harsh chapter lived in silence. She spoke quickly, evenly, almost like a machine. "You have to input product codes within 3 seconds, print receipts in under 10, and the till has to balance to the cent. $1 off and it goes on the incident report." Her tone wasn't a warning. It was the voice of someone who had been crushed by the industrial press of corporate procedure. No emotion left, only the instinct to survive. Evan, who had once signed off on those very protocols from his executive office, now saw them twisted into something distorted and cruel when enforced by people who had no moral line like Derek. The morning rush turned everything chaotic. Long lines, the coffee machine breaking down, and Derek looming at the end of the counter, eyes scanning every movement like a prison warden eyeing inmates. When Evan accidentally entered the wrong product code and had to void the transaction, the customer had already walked away. Derek stepped in immediately, his fake smile gone in an instant, like someone had flipped a switch. "One more void like that and I'll deduct it directly from your paycheck, Mark. We don't have room for incompetence here." Evan nodded, swallowing his anger. He knew he had to watch, not react. Not yet. While wiping down the counter, Evan noticed Lena quietly glance at her phone. In a single heartbeat, her expression shifted from anxious to terrified. She quickly shoved the phone away like someone caught committing a crime. Evan moved closer and asked softly, "You okay?" Lena shook her head, eyes down as she bent to organize a drawer, whispering like the cameras could hear. "If I don't come up with the money by Friday, he's going to send a video to corporate, accuse me of stealing." Evan froze for a second. "What video?" She didn't answer. Instead, she handed him a folded, sweat-dampened note. The red ink screamed off the paper. $950. Deadline, Friday. Why take money on shift 14? Watch the cameras. Evan forced himself to stay calm as he read, but something inside him was screaming. A staff member being blackmailed with forged evidence. And what was worse, she believed there was no one she could trust, nowhere she could turn for help. He glanced up to the ceiling. The 360-degree camera blinked steadily, and suddenly a chilling question echoed in his mind. If he could trap her, how many others has he done this to before? This wasn't just about $1 gone missing. It was $1 laced in blood, the perfect excuse to power an entire network of silent extortion under the disguise of a business. Evan knew at that moment. He wasn't on the outside anymore. He had stepped into the eye of the storm. The afternoon passed with fewer customers, but the tension inside the store never eased. Each time Derek emerged from his office, the air seemed to thicken. Everyone stiffened into perfect postures, their movements robotic like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. Evan began asking small questions, simple, polite, but just sharp enough to tap into the cracks forming beneath the surface. In the walk-in cooler, a young employee named Connor whispered while stocking shelves, "I'm the only one who's lasted 6 months, longest so far. Lena's been here 2 years, but I think it's only because she has no other choice." Then, hesitating, he added, "Derek calls it performance management through heat and pressure." That was all Evan needed to understand. This wasn't just bad management, this was a control strategy built on fear, where the strong preyed on the weaknesses of others. And that predator. Miles Benton was not some petty tyrant. He had a method, a system, and a pattern. He was a hunter. When Lena was reassigned to inventory in the back mid-shift, a punishment disguised as a task, Evan took the chance to speak to her in more detail. In the dim light of the supply room, he noticed her eyes were red. "Has he done this to anyone else?" he asked. She was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. "Jasmine quit last month after getting a request for financial assistance. Tyler tried to pay half before giving up. Derek said they were stealing, but really, they paid to escape." Her voice seemed to fall into an icy void. "And I stayed." Evan asked, "Why you? Why did he choose you?" Lena answered flatly, without a tear, "Because I'm a single mom. My son needs medication every week, and my credit report has a red flag. Derek knows all of that. He chooses his victims carefully." That answer made Evan feel sick. Derek wasn't just extorting. He was hunting people with no way out. The emotional tipping point came when Lena shared a detail that made Evan take a half step back. "I once overheard him arguing with someone in the office. His name was Quentin. He was demanding his cut for this quarter." Evan felt like someone had just squeezed the breath out of his lungs. Quentin Xavier. The regional manager Evan himself had approved for promotion, praised for his consistent performance in the Eastern Division. They weren't just partners in crime. They were part of a closed system, bound together in the shadows by the very loopholes in iron fuel that Evan had never bothered to inspect. In that moment, he understood. Focusing only on Derek would be like ripping a single weed from the top. To remove it entirely, he'd have to dig up the entire foundation, and this was only the beginning. That night, Evan couldn't sleep. In the cramped motel room 3 blocks from the gas station, he reopened the internal audit framework he had designed back when the company hadn't even opened its 10th branch. Beneath all the polished reports and upward trending metrics, he noticed a glaring blind spot. Data control at the station level had been delegated entirely to the on-site manager. No cross-checking, no independent storage except the fuel pump cameras, and that flaw gave him an idea. The next morning, while pretending to tidy up the coffee station and pick up trash, Evan leaned in close to Lena and whispered, "The fuel pump cameras stream directly to the central server. They can't be edited. What if we match the time of the transaction he altered with the actual camera footage?" Lena froze, then slowly nodded. For a moment, her eyes reflected something not of fear, but of cautious hope. "But to do that, we need the file he used to threaten me." Evan checked his watch, 2:12 p.m. "Do you know when he leaves his office?" Lena replied, 2:30. He smokes like Swiss clockwork." Evan nodded, signaling her to prepare. In his mind, every step of the plan began running like code he once wrote himself. Signal, cigarette, time window, 5 minutes, tools, trust, and a USB drive in his shirt pocket. At precisely 2:31, Miles pulled out his phone and stepped toward the smoking area in the back. Lena glanced through the glass door and whispered, "Go." They rushed into the office. A cramped space with a desk, a chair, and an outdated desktop computer. Evan sat down and typed quickly. Password? Lena furrowed her brow, trying to remember. His Mustang plate number. SAR J1842. The screen unlocked. Before him was a file system labeled Associate Reports, Adjustments, and an Excel file named Recon Master V4. Every click confirmed what Evan had feared. Timestamps manipulated, transactions rerouted, and employee contributions with handwritten notes beside them. Lena W. Late, needs warning, or Tyler paid 50% follow-up next month. And a column in bold red QX share. Evan had no doubts left. This wasn't isolated misconduct. This was a model. A criminal micro-enterprise operating inside the very company he built. Just as he finished copying the files onto the USB, Lena gasped, "He's back early!" There was no time to exit cleanly. Evan glanced around, then quickly opened a filing cabinet and pretended to search for a shift adjustment form. When the door flung open, Miles's eyes shot straight toward them. His gaze narrowed, voice sharp as a blade. "What are you two doing in my office?" Evan smiled faintly, keeping just enough nervousness in his tone. "Mike told me to fix my Tuesday hours. Lena was showing me where the forms are." Miles stepped further in, hand brushing the drawer Evan had just touched. "That form's not here. It's at the front desk." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Then Miles waved his hand. "Out." And Mark. Don't get too curious. Curiosity doesn't suit the new guy. As the door closed behind them, Evan said nothing, but inside he knew a line had been crossed. The plan had moved past the point of no return. That night, in the shadows of a parked car outside the gas station, Evan replayed the secret recording captured by the phone clipped near his collar. Miles's voice came through clearly, smooth like a rehearsed monologue. The method for altering transaction times, the technique for sanitizing data, the process for erasing traces from internal cameras, and, most importantly, his strategy for manipulating and threatening vulnerable employees. "People fear being fired more than being falsely accused," he said with a low chuckle. "And when they're scared, they pay." The next morning, Evan walked into the station playing a new role. A desperate man looking to strike a deal with the devil. When lunch break came, he edged close to Miles and whispered, "You got a minute? I need to talk in private." Miles looked up, eyes half skeptical, half satisfied. "My office, 5 minutes." As the door closed behind them, Evan dropped his shoulders, sliding seamlessly into character. "I'm behind on child support. Credit card companies are all over me. I need more income. Off the books." Miles was silent for a moment, then planted both hands on his desk and stared directly at Evan. "What are you proposing?" Evan smirked. "I'm good with numbers, took some accounting classes. If you need someone to handle the digital stuff, I can help. No questions. No loose lips." A sly smile curled at the corner of Miles's mouth as if he were looking at a younger version of himself. "Not bad, Mark. Not bad at all." Later that night, after the store closed, Miles summoned Evan to the office once more. He turned on the monitor, logged into the system, and gave a sidelong glance as if testing him. "Watch closely. This is how I clean a bad sales day. This one here I pull into the early morning. That one I merge into the earlier shift. And this. Inventory deduction. Makes it all look legit, right?" Evan nodded, masking his disgust with feigned admiration. Miles kept clicking, narrating every move. "Thing is, all the paperwork checks out. Reports are solid. If anyone asks questions, I just pull up the logs. Who's going to argue with that?" Then Evan, playing the role perfectly, slipped in a quiet question, testing the waters. "And your brother, Quentin?" The air froze for a beat. Miles looked up, eyes like ice. "Who told you that name?" Evan had spoken too soon. Alarms rang in his head, but Miles only smiled after a tense pause. "Well, well, you're sharper than I thought. But remember this, Mark. There are names you don't mention if you want to keep climbing." Evan left the office with his heart pounding. Miles was suspicious, but not certain. From now on, every step would be like walking on glass. Beneath it, a drop into darkness, and the predator had begun to smell blood. But Evan also knew he held the one thing no one could refute, the recorded confession of a man who believed he could never be overthrown. The sky that morning was heavy with gray clouds. Evan arrived earlier than usual, stepping into the parking lot before anyone else had shown up, except for a black SUV silently parked in the farthest corner, its license plate marked for internal administrative use. The audit task force had arrived. 0 hour was no longer a projection. It was now. Miles entered the store in an unusual mood. Gone was the cocky smile he wore every morning, replaced by constant glances at the clock and fingers swiping nervously across his phone. Around 9 a.m., the automatic door chimed as 3 men in gray suits entered, followed by a silver-haired woman whose eyes were sharp as blades, though her voice remained steady and composed. "Good morning, Station 27. We're from the Internal Inspection Division of Headquarters." Miles emerged from behind the counter, forcing a smile onto his lips. "Oh, Mr. Quentin didn't mention there'd be others. Shall I prepare the meeting room?" The woman casually flipped open the tablet in her hand. "Actually, we already have a list and a directive. First, we'd like all employees to head to the break room. All of them." The atmosphere thickened instantly. Employees exchanged glances, then silently walked toward the back like fish sensing an undercurrent. Evan followed last. Inside the cramped room, the woman projected a slide onto the wall. "Transaction discrepancy analysis. Station 27. Past 24 months. Miles stood near the door, trying to keep his composure. The young man beside the woman spoke up. "Derek Owens, or rather, Miles Benton. You are directly named in 18 instances of altered transaction timestamps, 14 falsified inventory entries, and at least 6 cases of employee financial coercion." Miles scoffed. "Who, Lena? Or that new guy Mark, been here 3 days?" The room went silent. Evan stood, calmly removed his glasses, then took off the baseball cap that had concealed half his face for the past 3 days. "Actually, I'm Evan Carter, founder and chief executive officer of Iron Fuel." It was as if lightning struck the room. Lena covered her mouth in shock. Miles stepped back as if he had seen a ghost. "No way," he stammered. "This is some kind of setup." The woman pressed play. Miles's voice rang out clearly. "Let them cry all they want, as long as the money lands in the account. I'll fix the reports. And QX, he only cares about the profit margin." A blow that couldn't be denied. Miles lunged for the door, but 2 police officers were already waiting outside. An arrest warrant was presented at the same moment a statement arrived from corporate. "Quentin Xavier, regional director, has been suspended and is under internal investigation as of 5 a.m. today." In that moment, Lena looked at Evan. Not with the gaze of an employee to a boss, but with the eyes of someone who had just witnessed justice made real. 1 month after the dramatic arrest at gas station 27, the place once known for intimidation and manipulation had become unrecognizable. The old yellow walls had been repainted a deep, elegant navy. The floors were polished with new tiles. The staff break room no longer featured a broken chair and a rotting table, but was now furnished with soft armchairs, an automatic coffee machine, individual lockers, and even a temporary childcare area set up behind the former warehouse. Yet the most profound change was not in the physical space. It was in the eyes of those who once kept their heads down in silence. They no longer averted their gaze when customers walked in. They smiled. Evan Carter stood before the staff on reopening day, his voice calm yet filled with emotion. "Today is not just the reopening of Station 27. Today, we renew a promise." Standing beside him was Lena, now dressed in a new uniform with a name tag that read, "Assistant Manager, Lena Walsh." She stood tall, no longer shadowed by fear, but radiating confidence and poise. Evan announced sweeping changes that had been implemented across the company. All family connections in senior management positions had been severed, the internal financial reporting system replaced with 2 layers of independent audits, a whistleblower hotline established that bypassed even regional directors, an 18% raise granted for all frontline staff, and the introduction of anonymous performance audits. Because, as Evan noted, one of the people working the floor could very well be the CEO. When Evan asked any questions about those who were wrongfully accused before, a hand timidly rose. It was Tomas, the longtime maintenance worker who had once quietly warned Evan not to ask too many questions if he wanted to keep his job. His voice cracked. "What about those who were fired for theft they didn't commit?" Evan nodded. "All have been contacted. They received a formal apology, offers to return with full back pay and compensation. The records labeling them as thieves have been completely erased." The door opened. A woman carrying a child stepped in. It was Jasmine, who had chosen to quit rather than pay Miles. "Sorry I'm late. The sitter had a hiccup." Lena burst into tears, hugging her. "You really came back?" Jasmine nodded. "I couldn't stay away, not when there's a daycare in the back now." Applause broke out across the room. After the ceremony, Evan stepped out back. He found Lena with Tomas inspecting the new coffee machine. "How's Jason?" he asked, referring to her 6-year-old son. Lena beamed. "His meds are fully covered by the company now. The specialist you recommended is amazing. He hasn't had a night asthma attack in weeks. Next week, we're moving into a new apartment through the company's housing support program." She paused, then asked softly, "Why didn't you just fire Miles and go back to headquarters like any other CEO?" Evan looked out the glass door, watching employees greet customers, and smiled slowly. "Because I needed to remember that a company isn't built on quarterly reports. It's built on each person inside it. My father used to say, if you want to know what a child is like, look at their babysitter. If you want to know what your company is, look at how it treats its most vulnerable employee. And I forgot that, until I became Jake Morrison." The glass door opened. A man in prison clothes, handcuffed, was escorted in by police to be identified by the victims. One of Quentin Xavier's henchmen. He froze when he saw Evan. I can explain," Evan interrupted him gently but firmly. "Tell it to the prosecutor. I believe the law is finally listening." As the man was led away, Lena's phone buzzed. She grinned. "It's Alicia, the assistant who got fired for reporting Miles. She just accepted the offer to return as branch manager at the new location." Evan turned to look at the gas station. For the first time in many months, it was filled with laughter. Customers were greeted with genuine smiles. Staff moved about freely, with no eyes watching from hidden cameras. In that moment, he thought to himself, if his father were still alive, he would smile, because the company that had once lost its way had found its heart again. On the final afternoon of the reopening week, Evan chose to sit at the iron bench just outside the glass door, the same spot where he had once silently watched his own store through a fogged window. Back then, he saw a hollow-eyed Lena, a store weighed down by pressure, and a system that had grown cold to the very soul it was meant to serve. Today, in that same seat, he saw Lena smiling as she walked her son to the car, saw Tomas helping an elderly customer fill her tank, saw Jasmine training behind the coffee counter, and saw himself. Not as the CEO perched atop the corporate tower, but as part of a quiet, honest rhythm of life. His phone buzzed. A message from the legal department. Miles Benton and Quentin Xavier have been officially charged with 7 counts ranging from extortion to financial record tampering. Total damages uncovered, $241,000. Victims will be summoned to testify. Full cooperation underway. Evan nodded without saying a word. What stirred inside him was not satisfaction, but a sharp ache as he thought about what those cold numbers truly meant. Months of lost wages, countless sleepless nights, and all the people who had left Iron Fuel in silence, believing they weren't worth protecting. Lena sat beside him, handing him a cup of black coffee with no sugar, just as she had each day that week. "Are you planning to do this every year? Disguise yourself and come back?" Evan looked at her, a slight smile curling at the corner of his lips. Maybe. But if I do the rest of my job well, I won't have to anymore. Together they looked out through the glass where young Jason was hopping joyfully around a freshly planted flower bed. He looks like he's never known what it's like to live in a car, Lena said. Evan placed a hand gently on her shoulder. And hopefully, he never will again. Before leaving, Evan paused in front of a newly mounted sign by the coffee station. The one spot every employee passed each day. The words were simple, but carried more weight than any official policy. Justice doesn't start with a camera. It starts with the courage of someone who dares to speak up. He didn't need to say anything more. The change had already begun. From a fake name tag, a discreet recording, and a young mother who refused to stay silent. And perhaps, in a world too used to ignoring its quietest voices, that is the only thing that still truly matters. A business is only truly sustainable when it dares to reflect on itself from the lowest level. The place where weary sighs are often lost among revenue reports. By stepping down, listening, and taking action, Evan Carter not only exposed a web of corruption, but also restored what matters most: trust. If you believe that justice does not begin with power, but with the courage to speak up, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. And don't forget to leave a comment with the phrase "Dare to Shine" to remind each other that sometimes the greatest changes begin with the quietest acts.